A mother tells the story of how her only son brings home a woman who smiles politely but keeps her at a distance. At first, the mother thinks it is just personality differences. But as the wedding planning begins, she notices that every choice seems to erase her side of the family. Her language, her traditions, even the simple idea of her walking her son down the aisle in their old family church, is quietly pushed aside. Step by step, the daughter-in-law excludes her from the guest list, the rehearsal, and finally from the ceremony itself, blaming budget and stress. The mother starts to see the pattern clearly, realizing that this woman is not just planning a wedding but slowly cutting her son away from his roots so that he will belong only to her and her family. The story follows the mother's inner struggle as she decides whether to stay silent to keep her son's happiness intact, or expose what is really happening. In the end, she chooses a dignified way to reveal the truth, forcing her son to see the manipulation, and the family must face a hard decision that leads to painful honesty, new boundaries, and a quiet, hard-earned peace. When my son told me that his own bride did not want me at their wedding, the sound of his voice faded and all I could hear was the ticking of the kitchen clock behind him, loud and hollow, like someone knocking on an empty house. I remember exactly where I was standing. At the stove, spoon in my hand, a pot of soup simmering so long that the smell of onion and garlic had sunk into the curtains. Steam rose in slow curls, but everything inside me felt frozen. My son sat at the table, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if he expected it to open and swallow him. He said that it was complicated, that she was under a lot of stress, that the guest list had gotten out of control. He said many small sentences like that, each one breaking off in the middle, but hidden beneath all his excuses was a single truth he could not disguise. His future wife did not want his mother at their wedding. I watched his lips move, but I barely heard the words. My mind kept flashing through memories of his life. The first day, I walked him into school, when his hand clung to mine like a vine. The time he broke his arm in the neighbor's yard and cried into my shoulder in the hospital hallway. The night before his first big job interview, when he paced the living room and I ironed his shirt 3 times just to calm myself down. All those years of being his safe place, and suddenly I was an inconvenience. A problem to be managed. I did not cry. Not then. The tears came later, after he left, when the soup had grown cold and the house smelled faintly burned, but in that moment, I took a slow breath and forced myself to sit down across from him. My hands trembled a little, so I wrapped them around the warm tea mug in front of me. I asked him gently to explain. His shoulders hunched even tighter. He said that his bride felt uncomfortable around me, that I made her nervous, that our traditions were too intense, our family too opinionated. She wanted a simple ceremony, he said, something clean and modern. No long blessings. No noisy relatives. No emotional speeches from the past. His voice cracked when he said that last part. From the past. That was what I was to her. A piece of his past that she wanted to trim away so their future would look smooth and tidy from where she stood. Outside the window, the afternoon light had started to soften into that golden color that normally soothed me. On any other day, I would have paused to notice how beautiful it looked on the leaves, how the shadows in the yard stretched long and lazy. But that day, the light only made the room feel more exposed, as if every hidden crack between us had suddenly been revealed. I told him I needed a moment. He nodded and stared at the table, his jaw tight. I walked into the hallway and rested my forehead against the cool wall. The paint smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I used on weekends. The house was small and old, but every corner of it carried our history. The scuff on the baseboard from when he rode his toy car into the wall. The faint marker stain near the light switch, where he wrote his name as a child. The creak in the third stair that always gave him away when he tried to sneak down at night. It felt impossible that in this same house, in this same kitchen, my son was telling me that the woman he loved did not want me watching him say his vows. After a few breaths, I went back to the table and sat down again. I folded my hands together so he would not see them shaking. I told him that I loved him, and I asked him a single question. Did he want me there? The way he looked at me will stay with me until the day I take my last breath. His eyes filled with something raw, almost like panic, He said that of course, he wanted me there. Of course I should be there. He said he was still trying to work it out with her. That nothing was final. That I should not worry. But his voice held that thin, stretched sound I had heard before, when he was younger and trapped between his own feelings and the pressure of others. In that moment, confusion and pain wrapped around each other so tightly inside me that I could not separate them. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was just wedding stress, that in the end it would all resolve and we would laugh about it someday. But something deeper, quieter, older than hope whispered another truth. This was not just about a guest list. Later that night, after he went home, I sat alone in my living room with only the floor lamp casting a warm circle on the rug. The television was off. The house hummed with the small, familiar sounds of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the windows. My mind drifted back, not to the pain of that afternoon, but to the years before all this. I tried to remember the last time life felt simple, when it was just my son and me, moving through our days with routines so plain and predictable that neither of us realized how precious they were. Back then, mornings were slow and ordinary. I would wake up before him, heat water for coffee, and listen to the kettle sing while the sun climbed over the rooftops. Our small kitchen would fill with the smell of toast and instant coffee, with the gentle scrape of chairs and the rustle of school papers. On weekends, he would sit at the table sketching little buildings on scrap paper, telling me he might become an architect one day. Or maybe a chef. Or maybe a teacher. He changed his mind often. But the light in his eyes when he imagined his future never changed. We did not have much money, but our home was full of warmth. The walls were decorated with family photos, framed drawings, and one crooked painting I bought at a yard sale because he said the colors reminded him of a sunset we once watched together from the bus stop. When my husband passed away, my son and I leaned on each other. We learned how to move through life with one less seat at the table, one less voice in the evenings, one less pair of hands to fix the leaky sink. Grief became a quiet third presence in the house, but so did resilience. I watched my son grow into a gentle, hardworking man. He called me after long days at the office, his voice tired but still carrying that familiar warmth. He came by most Sundays for dinner. I cooked his favorite dishes, and he always said they tasted better than anything he could buy. In those years before she appeared, I never once imagined that the day he chose a partner would also be the day someone tried to push me out of the story I had helped him begin. Back then, our life felt like a simple, steady song. And I had no idea that a discordant note was already on its way. Life in those days felt balanced in a way I did not appreciate until much later. My routines were small but comforting. I woke early each morning and opened my kitchen window, letting the soft breeze drift through the curtains while birds chattered in the maple tree outside. I brewed coffee in my old dented pot, the one my husband bought me on our 10th anniversary, and I sat at the table with my notebook, writing little lists for the day. My son visited often. Sometimes he came for dinner. Sometimes he dropped by just to fix a loose cabinet handle or sit on the porch swing and talk about work. He had always been that kind of son. Gentle, present, thoughtful in ways that made a mother's heart feel full even on difficult days. He worked at a small architectural firm downtown. The kind of place where people still greeted each other by name in the morning and shared leftovers during lunch. He liked that. He liked slow-paced things, familiar things, things that grew with patience instead of force. When he spoke about work, he always managed to make me smile. He talked about the old woman downstairs who sold fresh bread, about the stray cat that refused to leave the office steps, about the way the sunlight poured through the large glass windows at 3 in the afternoon. His voice had a warm hum when he enjoyed something. I used to listen to that hum just to reassure myself that he was happy. Our Sundays were my favorite. He would show up unannounced, his hair tousled from sleep, holding a bundle of laundry he never admitted he brought to my house on purpose. I would pretend not to notice, and he would pretend to be surprised when he found it washed and folded later. We cooked together, moving around the kitchen with a rhythm we had learned from years of being just the two of us. He loved my homemade noodles more than anything. He said no restaurant could ever beat the taste of something made by hands that raised him. And whenever he said that, I would turn away for a moment so he would not see the way my throat tightened with emotion. The house was old, but it breathed with our history. The creaking floorboards, the photos lining the hallway, the chipped ceramic bowl my husband left behind. Even the worn couch cushions carried the shape of countless quiet evenings we spent watching television or talking about nothing important at all. When my son first mentioned he was seeing someone, I felt joy rise in me like warm steam from a pot. I remember he told me casually, stirring his coffee one morning, as if the words themselves were fragile. He said she was kind, brilliant, ambitious, soft-spoken but confident. He liked how sure she was of herself. He liked how she challenged him. He liked how she made him feel seen. I listened with a smile, even though part of me felt a tiny, harmless ache. Not jealousy, just the quiet realization that life was shifting. That someone new would soon hold a piece of his heart that used to fit only in my hands. That is the natural rhythm of motherhood. You raise your child to let them go, even if letting go happens one thread at a time. When he finally brought her over for dinner, I remember feeling nervous in a way I had not felt since meeting my husband's parents many years ago. I set the table with the good dishes, scrubbed every corner of the house until my back ached, and stood by the stove breathing in the steam of simmering broth just to steady myself. When she walked through the door, her beauty struck me first. Polished, graceful, the kind of beauty that seemed effortless. She greeted me softly, her voice like silk against stone. She brought flowers and a small box of pastries, gifts chosen with care but handed with a certain distance that I could not quite place. Still, I welcomed her warmly. Dinner went smoothly enough. She complimented the food, praised the decor, asked polite questions. Yet something felt cool. Not unfriendly, just cool, like water that looked calm on the surface but held a chill beneath. She maintained eye contact just long enough to seem engaged but never long enough to reveal anything real. Her smile flashed at all the right moments, but it never reached her eyes. My son, however, glowed beside her. The way he looked at her made me want to try even harder. Over the next weeks, she visited a few more times. Each visit carried the same tone. Polite, distant, controlled. Still, I told myself that personality differences did not mean anything was wrong. People warm at their own pace. I believed that. I wanted to believe that. Looking back now, I can still recall the exact moment when the atmosphere began to shift. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with a subtle tightening, like a thread being pulled beneath fabric. The first suspicion did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a whisper, and I almost ignored it. The first clue came on an afternoon that should have been perfectly ordinary. My son stopped by after work, carrying a folder under his arm. He seemed excited in a way I had not seen before. A lightness in his step that made me smile as soon as he walked in. He hugged me, kissed my cheek, and asked if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table while I ladled hot soup into bowls. The steam curled upward, and he breathed it in with the kind of nostalgia that always softened his features. He opened the folder and showed me early sketches of the wedding venue they were considering. He had drawn soft lines for the arches, broad strokes for the courtyard, little notes scribbled in the margins. He looked proud, hopeful. But the moment she arrived at the house to join him, the room shifted. She walked in carrying a stack of printed papers, her perfume drifting behind her in a clean, sharp trail. She kissed him lightly on the cheek, glanced at the sketches, and smiled. Not warmly, not appreciatively, but in a way that told me she had already decided something. She placed her papers on the table. They were printouts of a very different venue. Sleek, modern, minimalist. Her tone was calm as she said she thought his sketches were cute, but the modern venue felt more mature, more appropriate for the life they wanted to build. Cute. She used that word twice. My son hesitated, and I caught the flicker in his eyes. A brief, nearly invisible falter. I had seen that look before when he was young and someone hurt his feelings. He never said the words out loud, but they were there in the tightness of his smile. She then mentioned that she preferred small weddings. She said she felt anxious around large groups. She said she wanted a ceremony that felt intimate and controlled. She said too many guests might ruin the emotional atmosphere. He nodded slowly, already folding himself into her vision. I said nothing yet. I knew better than to push, especially when love was involved. But later, when I cleared the table, I noticed something that stayed with me. She had made an annotation on the guest list. My family's section had been lightly crossed out in pencil. Not erased, just crossed out, as if she wanted to remove us but had not yet decided whether she could. I told myself it was an early draft. Nothing more. I convinced myself I was reading too much into things. But that night, after they left, I stood at the sink washing dishes and felt a faint, unsettling heaviness settle in my chest. The second clue came a week later. She called me to ask about a recipe she wanted to include at the rehearsal dinner. I felt touched. I thought it meant she was trying. But when I offered to cook it myself, she paused for too long. Then she said she preferred the caterer remake it because the presentation needed to look uniform. Presentation. That word floated in the air like dust. Then she corrected herself, saying she wanted everyone to feel equal, and that homemade dishes might put pressure on the menu balance. She said it in a soft tone, elegant even. But I felt the sting beneath it. She then mentioned gently, almost casually, that she hoped I would not be offended if some traditions were removed. Not all. Just some. Only the ones from my side. Only the ones that mattered to us. I hung up the phone and sat very still in my living room. The sound of the old clock echoing through the house again. Outside, wind rustled the leaves. But inside, everything felt unmoving. The third clue came when the wedding planner called me. She apologized for not reaching out sooner. She said she had heard that I preferred not to be involved in the process. I had never said that. My chest tightened so sharply that I had to sit down. When I asked who told her that, she hesitated. Then she said it was communicated as a request from the bride. A request from the bride. That was the moment when suspicion curled into something more defined. Not yet solid, not yet undeniable, but unmistakably real. I thanked the planner, ended the call, and sat alone in my kitchen for a long time. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. And the truth settled inside me slowly, sinking deeper than I wanted to admit. This was not stress. This was not misunderstanding. This was not clashing personalities. Something was being planned. Something deliberate. Something meant to reshape my son's life. And I felt myself standing at the edge of a truth I was not ready to see. The discovery did not come crashing down in a single moment. It arrived in fragments, like shards of glass catching the light one by one until the full shape of what was happening finally revealed itself. It began 4 days after that phone call. My son visited again, this time alone. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of the world rested on them. He said she had been stressed, distant, sharp in her tone. He said he had tried to comfort her, but she snapped at him. He said she told him he needed to set clearer boundaries with his past if he wanted their marriage to succeed. Boundaries with his past. He did not realize what she meant. I did. He spoke for a long time, pouring out confusion and worry, trying to justify her words even as he felt them pierce him. I listened and held his hand and told him gently that love should not make him feel small, but he shook his head, insisting she did love him. When he left that night, I saw the boy in him again. The boy who used to doubt himself whenever someone he cared about raised their voice. The next morning, I decided to go through the wedding binder he had accidentally left behind on a previous visit. It was tucked inside a neat white cover with gold lettering. Beautiful, organized, elegant. Her taste was everywhere on those pages. I told myself I was only flipping through it to better understand. Not to snoop, not to pry. But as I turned each page, my breath stilled. The seating chart. My side was nearly empty. The program. All our family traditions were removed. The photography notes. No portrait sessions with his family. The guest list. My cousins crossed out. My siblings marked as optional. My role listed as seat mid-row. No escort. My chest tightened until I felt dizzy. Then, tucked between 2 pages, I found something else. Notes in her handwriting. Not meant for the planner. Not meant for him. Notes written for herself. They read like a quiet confession. Limit his exposure to old influences. Ease transition into minimal contact. Avoid conflict by controlling early. Make clean start after marriage. Focus on shaping new family identity. My fingers trembled so hard the page rustled like dry leaves. Limit his exposure. Minimal contact. Control early. Clean start. Clean start. As if his entire past could be scrubbed away. As if I were a stain. I closed the binder and placed both hands on the table, leaning forward as the room swayed. I took slow breaths, the way I used to when calming myself after arguments with my husband years ago, but this pain felt sharper, deeper, heavier. This was not about a wedding. This was not about stress. This was about erasing me, erasing us, erasing everything that shaped my son. I knew then that I had a choice. Be silent and watch my son disappear into a life that would slowly chip away at him, or speak up and risk losing him in another way. That afternoon, I went to their home. My son was at work. She answered the door, her hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully arranged. She invited me inside with a polite calmness that felt like a thin sheet of glass over something sharp. I asked if we could talk. We sat across from each other in the living room. Her posture was impeccable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I told her calmly that I had seen the wedding binder. I told her I understood she wanted control of her wedding but asked why she felt the need to remove my family. Why she felt I should be seated in the middle rows. Why she told the planner I preferred not to be involved. She did not deny it. She sighed softly and said she wanted a certain image. Something clean. Something new. Something free of what she called unnecessary emotional weight. Unnecessary emotional weight. My entire existence reduced to that. She said she feared that my influence was too strong. That my son relied on me too much. That if he continued to stay close to me, he would never fully build the future she envisioned. She said marriage meant choosing a new life entirely. And that required loosening old ties. Loosening old ties. She meant me. I stared at her for a long moment, the air between us heavy. She was not malicious. That was the painful part. She was certain, unshakably certain that her way was correct. I asked her if she truly believed a marriage could thrive by cutting away a man's family. She smiled politely and said some families hold on too tightly. Some families. She meant mine. That night, I sat alone with the truth. She was not trying to share my son. She was trying to claim all of him. Mind, heart, loyalty, future. She had crafted her plan carefully, gently, subtly. Pull one thread at a time, until the old life unraveled. But she made one mistake. She underestimated a mother's love. The next step required quiet strength, not confrontation. I knew that if I accused her directly in front of my son, she would twist the story, paint herself as misunderstood, and make me appear jealous or controlling. I needed to show him the truth, not force him to accept it. So I gathered everything. The seating chart, the altered program, the annotated guest list, the removed traditions, the planner's message, and finally, the notes she wrote in her own hand. I placed them on the dining table in neat rows, each page like a piece of a larger puzzle waiting for light to touch it. That evening, I called my son and asked if he could come over. My voice was calm. Too calm. He sensed it immediately and agreed without asking questions. When he arrived, he stepped inside and saw the papers spread across the table. Confusion flickered across his face. I motioned for him to sit. He did, slowly, like someone bracing for impact. I slid the seating chart toward him first. He blinked. Then the program. He frowned. Then the photographer's notes. His breath caught. Finally, I placed the handwritten notes in front of him. His hand hesitated before picking them up. He read in silence. The room seemed to shrink. The ticking of the old clock grew louder. The air thickened with something unspoken. When he finished reading, he set the paper down and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. His shoulders rose and fell in a shaky breath. He whispered that he had not known. That she had never said any of this to him. That she had told him I wanted distance. That she had insisted my traditions overwhelmed her. His voice broke. He said he felt foolish. I moved to sit beside him and placed my hand on his back. I told him he was not foolish. Love blinds even wise hearts. Trust can be manipulated by gentle words. I told him that anyone could have been misled by someone who spoke softly while pulling quiet strings. He leaned into me, the way he did when he was a child, his forehead resting against my shoulder. He said he needed to talk to her. I nodded, but he needed to talk from clarity, not emotion. We spent the next hour discussing how he felt, how he had changed over the past months without realizing it, how he had drifted away from friends, family, routines, and even himself. He sat with those truths, not denying them, not dismissing them. When he finally stood, he hugged me. It was a long, silent hug, one that carried both pain and awakening. He left to confront her. The hours that followed felt like waiting for a fragile vase to fall. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I paced the living room. I sat in the armchair. I stood by the window. Every sound outside made my heart jump. Late that night, he returned. He walked inside quietly, his steps slow and heavy. His eyes looked tired, not from crying, but from seeing something clearly for the first time. He sat down on the couch. He said she admitted everything. Not with remorse, with justification. She said she believed family ties held people back. She said she wanted him to focus entirely on their future. She said controlling the wedding was the first step. She said she needed him to prove his loyalty by prioritizing correctly. When he questioned her, she grew defensive, then frustrated, then cold. He said he realized in that moment that the woman he loved had been showing him her true self all along, but he had been too in love to notice. Then he said something I will never forget. He said the moment he saw her expression, while she justified cutting me out, he felt something inside him close like a door. Not anger, not hatred, just clarity. That night, he told her he needed time. She begged. She demanded. She accused. He did not waver. He needed to see his own truth before he made a decision. News travels fast in our community, even when no one intends to spread it. Within a few days, hints of the broken engagement reached the edges of our circle. Friends called gently, asking if everything was all right. Relatives sent cautious messages, sensing something had shifted. Her family, however, did not respond gently. Her mother stormed into the narrative like a wind that had lost its direction. She called me, her voice sharp, accusing me of ruining her daughter's life. She said I had meddled, manipulated, poisoned my son's mind. I listened quietly. I did not raise my voice. When she finished, breathless with fury, I simply told her that truth is not poison, and clarity is not manipulation. She hung up without replying. The next day, she came in person. She stood at my door with a stiffness that belonged more to pride than to pain. She demanded to see my son, insisted he owed her daughter an explanation. My son stepped outside to meet her. His tone remained steady. He told her he had learned the truth. He said he loved her daughter, but he could not marry someone who wanted to erase the people who shaped him. He said partnership required mutual respect. He said loyalty built on fear was not love. Her mother argued. He did not bend. Neighbors peeked through curtains, not out of malice but out of concern. They had watched him grow up. They had watched me raise him. They understood more from the way we stood together than from any words shouted at the doorstep. In the following days, more truth surfaced. Her co-workers spoke to him privately, sharing that she had always been controlling, even with them. A friend of hers told him gently that she had a pattern of reshaping the people she dated. One relative admitted that she always wanted a partner who would start from zero, without old attachments. Bit by bit, her behavior became undeniable to everyone around us. She faced her own consequences, not through vengeance, not through humiliation, but through the slow unraveling of the image she had built. People saw her differently, not with cruelty, but with a clearer lens. And clarity can be its own kind of justice. In the weeks that followed, my son began to rebuild himself. Not loudly, not dramatically, with quiet, steady steps. He returned to old hobbies he had abandoned. He reconnected with friends he had unintentionally drifted from. He cooked meals in his own kitchen again, filling his apartment with scents that reminded him of home. He visited me often, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just sitting on the porch in silence while the wind whispered through the maple leaves. Healing is not a single moment. It is a slow unfurling, a gradual remembering of who we are. One evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said he finally understood something. He realized that love should never require someone to shrink, that partnership should not demand the cutting away of roots, that the right person would build a life with him, not replace the life behind him. He said he wanted his next chapter to be different. Not rushed. Not shaped by fear. Not painted in someone else's colors. I told him I was proud of him. Not for ending the engagement, but for choosing truth, for choosing himself, for choosing a life with room for the people who loved him without conditions. As for me, I found peace slowly. I returned to my routines, my morning coffee, my humming kettle, my quiet evenings. But now there was something softer in the house, a gentleness that came from knowing that honesty had prevailed without cruelty. My son began visiting more often, not out of need, but out of choice. We cooked together, laughed together, even began planning a small trip we had postponed for years. He was not broken. He was becoming, and I had witnessed his becoming with the kind of pride only a mother could understand. Now, when I look back on everything that happened, I do not feel anger. Not anymore. What I feel is gratitude. Gratitude for the truth that revealed itself before a life was built on silence. Gratitude for the strength my son found inside himself. Gratitude for the roots that held firm even when someone tried to cut them away. Life teaches us that love is not possession. Love is expansion. And no future built on erasing the past can truly flourish. My son is happier now. Lighter. More himself than I have seen him in a long time. And as for me, I wake each morning with a quiet peace, knowing that our bond survived something meant to sever it. Sometimes, life places us at a crossroads where silence seems easier, but truth spoken gently can save a soul from losing itself. And now, I turn to you. If you had been in my place, sitting at that kitchen table with your son's future written in someone else's hand, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of peace? Or would you have shown him the truth, even if it meant risking everything? Tell me in the comments, and if my story touched your heart, remember to subscribe and support this channel so more stories like mine can find their way to those who need them.